ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. We begin this evening with a story of greed and about fraud and potential disaster involving what are believed to be millions of substandard parts sold to the Army and Air Force. In Tampa today, a federal grand jury has indicted 3 former executives of a company called Aerodyne Investment Castings Inc. They are charged with selling the military turbine engine blades made out of scrap metal. The blades are used in more than 22,000 jet aircraft, helicopters, and tanks. They are critical parts, and their failure could spell disaster. ABC News has been investigating this case for some time, and ABC's Jim Slade has our first report on what those indictments are all about.
If one of the turbine blades Aerodyne made for helicopter or fighter engines broke, it could destroy the machine and kill the crew.
The whole design of the engine depends on the supreme high quality of that metal. When it fails, the blade may break off. The blade is moving at 1,200 miles an hour. The engine is turning at something like 1,000 revolutions per second, and it destroys the engine.
Government investigators say Aerodyne increased its profits by mixing scrap metal back into what were supposed to be 100% pure metals to stretch the supply. David Schmidt was Aerodyne's senior foundry manager before taking his suspicions to the FBI.
Well, when I was hired in, we were using scrap. That was just part of the procedure.
Mike Hennessy worked in the foundry for Schmidt.
Some of the parts were poured 100% scrap.
Further, ABC News has obtained documents that show Aerodyne employees were directed by senior management to falsify test results and that other devices were used to evade quality controls. Former employees say that one of the things that made it easy was the presence of at least one government inspector, Warren Fisher, who simply looked the other way.
When he was there, we were using scrap alloy 24 hours a day, all 3 shifts, with no problems at all.
What's more, when Fisher left the government, investigators say he went to work in a front company set up by the indicted Aerodyne executives. The company laundered excess profits made by watering the metal down with scrap. Fisher declined to speak with ABC News. The 3 executives that investigators say were responsible for Aerodyne's actions, Russell Baker and his sons Roger and Russell Jr., denied the charges and also declined to talk to ABC.
It's a matter of placing greed above national interest and safety of individuals that are trying to serve our country. So I view it as the most serious form of crime against the Department of Defense, probably right up there with espionage.
Congressman John Dingell is investigating the Aerodyne affair.
There appears to be significant peril with regard to the helicopters and with regard to the parts. There also appears to be danger to personnel, which is not being adequately addressed by the Department of Defense.
Over a 7-year period, Aerodyne manufactured millions of parts to be used for more than 22,000 helicopters, jets, and tanks currently in use by the military. Both the Army and Air Force declined to be interviewed for this report. In a statement, the Air Force said that they had not had any problems with the turbine parts, but critics are not satisfied.
I describe the military's response to this problem as being seriously inadequate, callous, and probably seriously indifferent.
According to investigators, there have been no systematic efforts by the Defense Department to test the parts or to determine whether they have caused any accidents. Jim Slade, ABC News, Washington.
Overseas in Geneva today, the strategic arms limitation talks, the negotiations between the U.S. and the Soviets to reduce the long-range nuclear weapons, resumed after a 7-month recess. The president said he wanted time for his administration to review American arms reduction policies. The review hasn't changed all that much, and ABC's Bob Zelnick is in Geneva.
Good morning. The new U.S. negotiator, Richard Burt, shook hands today with the new Soviet negotiator, Yuri Nazarkin. The faces change, but the problems blocking an agreement to limit long-range nuclear weapons remain. President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev agreed in principle to reduce strategic nuclear weapons by 35 to 50%. The biggest problem blocking conclusion of the deal still is the Star Wars missile defense system. The U.S. wants to test Star Wars components and deploy the system when it's ready. That would mean an end to the ABM treaty limiting missile defenses. The Soviets want to keep the ABM treaty and say they won't make cuts in offensive missiles without it.
This is probably going to be issue number 1 at the negotiations.
Other problems include what limits, if any, to place on mobile missiles and how to identify and count nuclear sea-launched cruise missiles, which look just like conventional missiles. Today, the Bush administration proposed a new wrinkle, a so-called verification and stability plan. It calls for some on-site inspection before a treaty is concluded. Inspectors could, for example, count the number of warheads on missiles, building confidence in their ability to detect cheating once a treaty is completed. But finishing work on that treaty will likely take years, leaving the verification experts with a great body of information and expertise, but no treaty to enforce. Bob Zelnick, ABC News, Geneva.
In a moment, the first nationwide accounting of chemical pollution. And later in our broadcast, Pete Rose on the legal offensive, suing the baseball commissioner. And a major proposal for helping youngsters make it through the wonder years on the American agenda.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by the makers of Advil.
The government of China condemned the United States for interfering in China's affairs. Official Chinese radio actually said that Americans were suspected of plotting some of the counter-revolutionary chaos. Our first report is from Washington. ABC's John McWethy on the Bush administration's latest effort to make a difference in Beijing.
It was the first step that President Bush has taken in nearly 2 weeks, ordering the State Department to again call in China's ambassador to Washington, Han Shu. The message, according to Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater, was to deplore the death sentences handed down in Beijing and Shanghai and urge clemency. On Capitol Hill, Secretary of State Baker unveiled other steps. First, postpone all high-level visits to China. Commerce Secretary Mosbacher was scheduled to go in July. Second, urge such institutions as the World Bank to delay making decisions on an estimated $1.4 billion in new loans to China. Listening today in the hearing room was Fang Ka, the son of dissident Fang Lejeune, who has sought safe haven in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing.
I think the administration has very clearly expressed our outrage over the brutal and unacceptable use of force against peaceful demonstrators.
Some senators, such as Republican Gordon Humphrey, do not believe that's enough.
I think our response to the slaughter in China has been pathetically weak.
But according to an ABC News Washington Post poll, 54% of the American people think President Bush has been tough enough. Only 38% think the president has been too weak. And nearly half of those questioned doubt that the U.S. can have any impact on China. That matches what one White House aide conceded, that the government of China is going to shoot those people no matter what the president does. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
Another example of how the system currently works in China, the government today invalidated all current passports and exit visas, which means that anyone who wants to leave the country will have to apply all over again. Our second report about China tonight is from the birthplace of Mao Zedong. And you may notice in this report that some members of China's younger generation seem to have forgotten Mao's role in the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, because against the turmoil of today's China, they have been invoking an image of Mao from much earlier days. ABC's Ken Kashiwahara is there.
Hunan Province. It is where Mao Zedong found fertile ground for his peasant revolution, where today people are using Mao's name to protest against the Communist Party he led. In this province, Mao is remembered with reverence and respect, remembered for his leadership and honesty. And in today's political climate, praise for Mao means criticism of the current regime. In the provincial capital of Changsha, thousands of students packed the streets during the pro-democracy demonstrations. Some carried portraits of Mao. Mao became the symbol of a complaint heard in towns and villages throughout the province. Peasants say government corruption and runaway prices are their biggest problems. Under Chiang Kai-shek, we had no money, this man remembers. Under Mao, life was good. Now the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. After the Beijing massacre, students from Beijing traveled 1,000 miles to this province. Some made a special pilgrimage to Shaoshan, where Mao was born, where his house stands as a shrine to Chinese communism. Here, in a guest book, one student wrote, "We are crying for Chairman Mao. The student's blood is flowing like a river." In a village, one peasant said she talked to the students as they passed through Hunan and believes what they told her. No one believes the government television, she says. Our government killed the students. Please tell the whole world what our government did. Mao would never have done that. Not everyone feels that way. At the high school where Mao studied and where he taught, these students said that soldiers could not have killed students, that the Voice of America was exaggerating what happened. Today, Hunan's universities are under university control again. The pro-democracy movement has been silenced by fear. The movement's leaders have disappeared. Some students who have remained say their brief, shining moment in Chinese history was worthwhile.
As to the effect of the movement, we can only say we've enlightened the people.
But most feel helpless. What can we do? Fight again? A student asks rhetorically. As one peasant put it, whoever has the power controls the country. He might have said, as Mao said, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Ken Kashwahara, ABC News in Hunan Province.
When we come back, Pete Rose says he never gambled on baseball. And later in the broadcast, a report from Switzerland on what you can do with your garbage and what you shouldn't do with fireworks.
This is World News Tonight